What makes the connection with an avoidant slowly collapse, even when feelings are still there? What destroys the connection isn't always easy to see. It hides in ordinary moments, a question, a tone, a need that slowly turn connection into resistance. It begins when the rhythm between two people stops matching. One person looks for closeness to feel calm, while the avoidant starts to pull back to feel the same. At first, it seems small, shorter answers, less eye contact, a neutral tone where warmth used to be. But these small shifts build up. What slowly destroys the connection with an avoidant is not rejection or lack of interest. It's emotional monitoring. When every pause, silence, or delay is examined for hidden meaning, the relationship stops feeling natural and starts feeling observed. The avoidant begins to experience ordinary interaction as surveillance, where attention turns into evaluation. That quiet tension makes even neutral moments feel like pressure. Each attempt to repair closeness under those conditions increases resistance instead. The bond doesn't break through conflict, but through the steady exhaustion of trying to feel safe in opposite ways. When an avoidant feels that closeness is becoming intense, they don't plan an exit. They adjust. They reduce contact, avoid deep talks, or stay on safe topics. To their partner, this looks like disinterest. To them, it feels like balance. They're not trying to hurt anyone, they're trying to breathe. But those same actions make the other person feel abandoned. What was meant to bring calm slowly turns into silence. The pattern repeats itself. One person moves closer, the other steps away. The more one chases, the more the other hides. Each side reacts to what the other does, and the distance keeps growing. Because there is no open conflict, both believe they're still trying. But what's really happening is a quiet negotiation of safety. One feels safe through contact, the other through space. Without awareness, both lose the middle ground. As this continues, even simple communication starts to sound tense. Normal questions carry hidden meaning. Every word feels loaded. The avoidant reads emotion as pressure, and pressure as risk. What used to feel natural now feels heavy. The bond remains on the surface, but the emotional exchange fades. Most people see this stage and think the avoidant has stopped caring. In reality, they're running out of capacity for closeness. The mistake is to keep talking, explaining, or asking for clarity. That adds more weight to a system already strained. Real repair doesn't start with more conversation. It starts with lowering intensity. When both can pause, listen, and give space, connection becomes possible again. Understanding this isn't about judgment. It's about seeing how patterns operate. Once you notice the rhythm, closeness, and retreat, you can stop pushing against it. Creating pause isn't losing someone. It's giving the bond a chance to breathe. Distance stops being a threat and starts being part of how connection survives. Avoidants rarely break connection through big arguments. It happens quietly, through control of closeness. When emotional energy feels too high, they start limiting contact. They don't announce this change. They simply adjust habits. Fewer messages, shorter talks, less sharing. The partner often sees this as rejection, but it's really the avoidance way of staying stable. When the relationship feels heavy, stepping back feels like protection. This shift is hard to notice because it builds slowly. The avoidant stays polite, answers questions, and shows up, but the warmth is gone. They're managing the interaction instead of living it. The partner senses something missing and tries harder. Asks, reaches out, explains. But every new effort feels like pressure to the avoidant, who then retreats further. What feels like care on one side feels like demand on the other. The problem isn't intent, it's interpretation. The avoidant isn't trying to punish. They distance to keep things predictable. Closeness that moves too fast feels unsafe because it brings uncertainty. Once the pace becomes unpredictable, they reduce emotional contact to restore order. What follows is a pattern. The more one person reaches, the less the other responds. Over time, this changes how the avoidant sees the relationship. The partner becomes a signal of stress, not comfort. Even kind gestures can feel like intrusion. When that happens, emotional sharing shuts down almost completely. The connection still exists in form, messages, plans, routines, but not in depth. At this point, many partners begin searching for answers. They ask what went wrong, why communication feels cold, or how to fix it. But asking in that state keeps the cycle alive. The real solution is behavioral. Slow down, stop chasing, and create space that doesn't feel like pressure. Only in that calmer environment can an avoidant re-engage without feeling trapped. As the avoidant withdraws, the partner feels the absence immediately. The silence doesn't sound neutral. It sounds like danger. For someone who needs closeness to feel stable, the lack of feedback activates uncertainty. They start observing everything: how long messages take to arrive, how the avoidant speaks, how their tone changes. Every delay becomes a sign of loss. This hyperattention often leads to behaviors meant to restore contact: longer explanations, emotional sharing, checking in, or seeking reassurance. To the avoidant, those same actions confirm the need to create even more distance. They read intensity as instability, and instability as risk. So, what began as a small imbalance turns into a circular exchange. Pursuit creates withdrawal. Withdrawal creates pursuit. The connection is now ruled by reaction, not choice. Both are trying to find balance, but in opposite directions. The more one insists on clarity, the more the other seeks silence. This pattern often feels invisible from inside. The anxious partner believes they are fixing the problem. The avoidant believes they are protecting the relationship from emotional overflow. Each is acting logically according to what safety means to them. But emotional logic doesn't align. One defines love through closeness. The other defines safety through space. That simple difference, left unchecked, quietly dismantles trust. When this cycle repeats, the emotional climate changes. Communication becomes strategic rather than spontaneous. The anxious partner measures their words to avoid triggering withdrawal. The avoidant calculates their responses to avoid confrontation. Both lose authenticity. Moments that once built connection now serve to manage risk. This gradual self-censorship is one of the clearest signs that connection is being replaced by survival behavior. Over time, this dynamic affects perception. The partner who pursues begins to feel responsible for maintaining contact, while the avoidant starts viewing interaction as work. Every conversation becomes a negotiation of comfort rather than an exchange of presence. The more this continues, the more both start associating the relationship with tension instead of relief. The connection stops being a source of stability and becomes a system that constantly requires management. This is usually the stage where frustration begins to surface. The partner wonders why showing care seems to make things worse. The avoidant wonders why their need for space is never respected. Both are correct within their frame of reference, but both are missing the shared language that could interpret intent accurately. Without that bridge, every gesture gets misread. The anxious side interprets calm as detachment. The avoidant interprets emotion as pressure. Breaking this loop doesn't happen through explanation. It happens through behavior. The pursuit must stop for space to regain meaning, and space must stop being used as defense for contact to feel safe again. That's the paradox. Both want closeness, but define it differently. When either side tries to convert the other's way of regulating, the system collapses. What's needed isn't more effort, but a recalibration of rhythm. Slower, simpler, quieter. Connection with an avoidant grows in stillness, not speed. When the pattern stabilizes, both sides begin to adapt unconsciously. The avoidant learns that calm is preserved by keeping emotion contained, and the partner learns that expressing emotion carries a cost. What once was openness becomes calculation. They still communicate, but the exchange serves function, not connection. It's no longer us, but a series of managed interactions designed to avoid discomfort. This quiet adaptation is subtle, which makes it dangerous. Each person believes they are preserving peace, yet both are actually reducing authenticity. The avoidant measures what can be said without triggering questions. The partner measures how much emotion can be shown without causing retreat. These constant adjustments reshape the atmosphere. The relationship stops evolving. It starts orbiting the problem instead. Over time, the avoidant begins to feel increasingly responsible for managing distance, while the partner feels responsible for maintaining contact. Both carry roles they never agreed to, but now perform instinctively. When these roles solidify, spontaneity disappears. Every gesture becomes interpreted rather than received. Even small acts of affection start to carry history, reminders of what worked once, or warnings of what backfired. At this stage, care becomes misunderstood. A kind message might feel intrusive. A question meant to connect can sound like control. The avoidant reacts not to the words themselves, but to the expectation they represent. They associate closeness with pressure and begin minimizing opportunities for emotional exposure. Meanwhile, the partner feels punished for caring, leading to confusion and guilt. Both now protect themselves rather than the bond. This phase is often when people say the connection feels different. It's not absence, it's tension masked as calm. Communication still occurs, but it lacks emotional movement. There's cooperation without warmth, presence without engagement. The avoidant feels safe but not close. The partner feels connected but not secure. Neither is fully wrong. They're just using opposite definitions of comfort. In this state, even well-meant reassurance loses value. The avoidant no longer trusts comfort that depends on emotion. The partner no longer feels stable without it. Each begins to seek validation in different directions. One through autonomy, the other through attachment. That divergence slowly drains the relational field. What remains is politeness, structure, and the illusion of stability. If nothing interrupts this phase, emotional disengagement becomes normalized. Both tell themselves that this is just how things are. But under the surface, the system is closing down. Energy once used for connection is redirected toward protection. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to reintroduce openness. Trust doesn't disappear, it becomes inactive. And without active trust, connection cannot grow. Recognizing this stage is critical because the behaviors look reasonable. Nobody is angry, nobody leaves. Yet the absence of visible conflict hides the presence of quiet collapse. What destroys the connection at this point isn't neglect, it's routine, predictability without presence, order without emotional participation. The only remedy is disruption, not confrontation, but gentle unpredictability. Small, genuine moments that remind both sides that safety and warmth can coexist. Once both sides settle into this managed calm, something begins to fade. Emotional responsiveness. The avoidant grows comfortable in neutrality, and the partner adapts to survive in it. The relationship becomes efficient but hollow. Conversations are handled like tasks, clear, polite, and brief. There's no visible conflict, which can be mistaken for peace. But what's missing is aliveness. The spontaneous exchange of attention that once made connection feel natural. The partner often adjusts first. They begin to self-edit. Topics once shared easily now feel risky. They filter their emotions before expressing them, choosing neutrality to avoid tension. The avoidant interprets this restraint as improvement. Finally, things feel easier. But what looks like harmony is actually withdrawal in disguise. When both sides stop showing emotion, communication loses texture. Everything becomes flat, controlled, predictable. For the avoidant, predictability brings relief but also distance. Without emotional variation, they lose reference points for intimacy. The partner's calm no longer feels peaceful. It feels empty. Yet they rarely name it as such. Instead, They rationalize, "We're stable now." This misreading extends the disconnection. Both have learned to mistake the absence of tension for the presence of connection. As this continues, emotional numbness sets in. The avoidant doesn't feel unsafe anymore, but they also don't feel moved. The partner doesn't feel rejected, but they don't feel received either. The system has reached equilibrium by shutting down emotional exchange. It's no longer conflict that threatens the bond. It's indifference. The destruction is complete when both can sit together and feel nothing shift inside. At this point, the partner may start to test small bids for reconnection: a compliment, a memory, an attempt at humor. The avoidant often responds politely but without engagement. It's not cruelty, it's detachment shaped by habit. They've trained themselves to stay within emotional limits that guarantee stability. Warmth now feels like a variable they can't control, so they regulate it out. The partner senses this but can't find the language to describe it. They only know that something essential has gone quiet. This stage is rarely explosive. It's the long silence before collapse. Both believe they're doing the right thing by keeping things calm. But calm has become the enemy of growth. What sustains connection isn't intensity. It's movement. Relationships need rhythm, moments of closeness and separation, expression and rest. When that rhythm stops, the bond loses circulation. The avoidant feels relieved by stillness, unaware that it's slowly turning into disconnection. The key indicator here isn't distance, it's stillness. Stillness that doesn't restore, but stagnates. The relationship might look intact, but the energy that feeds connection has been redirected toward control. Repair is still possible, but it requires contrast. Someone must reintroduce movement without pressure. Small signs of spontaneity, a light remark, an unexpected gesture, a pause without explanation, can begin to disrupt the numbness. The goal isn't to demand closeness, but to remind the system that emotional life still exists between two people. Without this gentle disruption, the avoidant adapts permanently to emotional neutrality. The partner eventually follows, not out of peace, but fatigue. And that's how most avoidant bonds end. Not through argument or betrayal, but through the quiet habit of safety replacing connection. It's not rejection that ends it. It's the absence of movement. Recovery begins the moment intensity is replaced by clarity. The avoidant cannot connect through pressure, but they can re-engage through predictability that feels low stakes. Emotional safety for them isn't created by grand gestures or long talks. It's built through consistency without demand. What brings them closer is not pursuit, but stability. The partner's challenge is to rebuild rhythm without expectation, to let space exist without interpreting it as rejection. This change starts with behavior, not discussion. Words about trust or communication often add weight to a dynamic already overloaded with meaning. Instead, small, consistent actions, being reliable, calm, and non-reactive, begin to lower the avoidant's internal alert system. Once the environment feels steady again, they start to participate more naturally. Not because they're convinced, but because safety has quietly returned. The avoidant doesn't trust intensity, but they notice patterns. When interaction remains steady over time, their attention reopens. They start initiating small moments of contact again, brief texts, shared tasks, practical collaboration. These gestures may seem minimal, yet they signal something important: emotional re-entry. For the partner, this requires restraint, accepting small steps as progress, not as hesitation. Each consistent neutral exchange rebuilds a sense of control that allows connection to grow. Still, the greatest risk in this stage is impatience. After long periods of distance, the partner often tries to accelerate closeness once signs of improvement appear. That acceleration repeats the original mistake. The avoidant reads renewed intensity as the return of pressure and retreats again. It's essential to understand that connection with an avoidant develops through pacing, not persuasion. The slower it moves, the stronger it becomes. Rebuilding trust with an avoidant doesn't involve reassurance through words. It's demonstrated through steadiness. Emotional predictability becomes proof of safety. When the avoidant sees that affection or presence doesn't lead to escalation, they begin to associate closeness with relief instead of risk. At that point, genuine intimacy can reappear. Subtle, quiet, but real. For the partner, this process requires detachment from outcome. The goal isn't to make them open up, but to reestablish an environment where openness is voluntary. When control is removed, participation becomes natural. Connection can't be demanded, it can only be invited. And invitations require calm timing, gestures that are felt as optional rather than obligatory. This approach changes the definition of effort. True effort in this dynamic isn't chasing, it's maintaining composure when silence appears. It's showing interest without urgency and presence without persuasion. These behaviors create space for the avoidant to test closeness without fear of being consumed. Once they confirm that closeness doesn't erase autonomy, their engagement deepens naturally. What destroys the connection is not distance, but the meaning assigned to it. When distance is treated as threat, pressure replaces curiosity. But when distance is treated as a rhythm, part of how connection breathes, the avoidant begins to relax within it. This shift transforms silence from a wall into a pause. The space that once felt empty becomes neutral again, and from neutrality, closeness can grow. Understanding this dynamic is less about fixing the avoidant and more about refining the system. Connection is not a permanent state. It's a moving balance of space and contact. When both people stop treating those movements as emergencies, the relationship stabilizes without control. The bond becomes sustainable because neither has to sacrifice their way of feeling safe to maintain it. Lasting connection with an avoidant doesn't depend on intensity, it depends on steadiness. The relationship remains stable only when both people understand the difference between movement and disturbance. Movement keeps the bond alive. Disturbance overwhelms it. The avoidant's way of staying connected is through moderation, predictable rhythm, low reactivity, and emotional transparency without urgency. The partner's growth lies in learning to stay grounded even when distance appears. When these two adjustments meet, a quiet equilibrium forms. The avoidant no longer experiences closeness as loss of control, and the partner no longer experiences space as abandonment. Interaction stops revolving around fear and begins revolving around rhythm. Both start to see that connection is not a constant presence of the other, but the consistent availability of safety. This insight turns the relationship from a reactive system into a responsive one. The most effective way to maintain this balance is through awareness. The moment emotional intensity begins to climb, the focus should shift from convincing to calming. The avoidant feels connection through reliability, not repetition of affection. Reliability means doing what is said, respecting pause, and responding in measured ways. For the partner, this may feel restrained at first, but it's the environment in which genuine connection thrives. Sustainable closeness doesn't require the avoidant to change their core temperament. It only requires that both understand how their differences interact. When space is respected and emotion is expressed responsibly, tension reduces on both sides. Trust then becomes a byproduct of repetition, not reassurance. Small, consistent experiences of safety build more connection than emotional intensity ever could. The avoidant begins to participate more freely once the pressure to respond disappears. Their calm is no longer read as detachment, and their quiet no longer feels like punishment. The partner learns that presence doesn't need to be constant to be secure. This mutual recognition marks the turning point, from managing the relationship to inhabiting it. What destroys connection is the failure to adapt to difference. What sustains it is the discipline of awareness. Each person must know their rhythm, when to approach, when to pause, and how to interpret silence accurately. When these rhythms synchronize, even partially, the dynamic stops being a conflict of needs and becomes a balance of energies. Relationships with avoidance aren't fragile by nature, they're precise. They require attention to pace, tone, and timing. They reward consistency and punish impulsivity. But once understood, they offer a different kind of stability. Calm, steady, self-regulating. The avoidant doesn't need to be changed. They need to feel that closeness won't cost them autonomy. The partner doesn't need to suppress emotion. They need to express it in ways that maintain safety. Connection with an avoidant survives when both choose rhythm over reaction. The more predictable the atmosphere, the deeper the trust becomes. And when safety is restored, affection naturally returns. Not as performance, but as ease. That's how emotional distance stops expanding and starts breathing again. If you recognize these patterns in your own experience, take a moment to reflect before reacting. Ask yourself whether the behavior you're seeing is rejection or regulation. That distinction changes everything. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective helps others understand their own. And if this content brought clarity, consider liking and subscribing for more insights on emotional patterns and relational dynamics. Thanks for watching.